Welcome to Slay Your Dragons with Compassion, my podcast made in conjunction with online events. And today I'm very, very happy to welcome a very old friend, Julian Marshall, who I first met was becoming a bit of a pop star with Marshall Hayne Dancing in the City, which was an anthemic sort of dance track, and was also with the Flying Lizards, and was making his way in music, but his path's it stayed very musical, but it's taken a very different direction. And I was incredibly impressed, Julian, when you produced a piece about Gertrude Kolmar, who was a woman who was a victim of the Nazis in the concentration camps. And you wrote, was it an operetta or a sort of a choral?
I would describe it as a kind of cantata, it's so-called kind of a small choral piece with a soloist and a couple of cellos. So I called it a cantata because the only name I could think of which seemed to fit at the time.
I was very moved by it. It sort of had a sort of similar resonance for me of Steve Reich's Trains. And there was something about the impending horror and actually managing to capture in music. And it feels like you've made music something that's been quite elastic for you. You're no longer trying to please the crowds, and yet you do write some very beautiful pieces. Can you tell us a little bit about your musical journey?
Yeah, sure, Malcolm. Well, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for immediately talking about Kolmar, etc. Well, I grew up in a musical family. My mother, my father, and my brother were all professional musicians. And I mean, my brother still is a professional musician. He's actually 12 years older than me. So by the time I was 4 and he was 16, he was pretty much a grown-up as far as I was concerned. And they all had their different listening tastes. I mean, there was some kind of similarity, but I was listening to music from the earliest age, sometimes for many hours a day of everything. So what you just said around kind of stylistic kind of breadth it's just been a part of my kind of musical DNA for as long as I can remember. And so on a given day, I was listening to Stravinsky, Miles Davis, Buddy Holly, Dave Brubeck, Count Basie, whoever it might have been. And for me, it was just music. So I've always found that this kind of stylistic kind of flexibility or fluidity is something which just feels very natural to me. At the same time, that's also caused a certain amount of confusion to me. And indeed, you're right. I mean, in the early years, I was very keen to kind of prove myself and to, make a success. And, when that happened, it was an amazing gift. I was absolutely thrilled to bits. Our very first single ever released turned out to, sell, I think, around 2 million copies, and we got all the discs that go with it, etc. That was absolutely wonderful. What wasn't so wonderful is I felt completely lost and very, very not out of control and not clear about the choices that I was making. And so it took me a while and quite a lot of disruption in my life until I began to feel that I kind of had a clearer sense of the voices to listen to. And I remember one particular occasion that, because as you know, Malcolm, I've been very interested in kind of, like the inquiry, who are we as human beings? So that's been very much at the forefront of my interest for many years. Kind of started really with a plunge into doing the EST training back in 1980. And anyway, some years after that, there was a weekend I was doing with Genpo Roshi, who is a Zen master, and we were talking about the different voices that inhabit themselves in our place of being. And I realized that my agent voice was completely suppressing my artist voice. The agent voice was saying, you not exactly pleasing, but it was more about, the commercial realities dominate. And I realized how suffocating that was. So I had to fire that agent in my mind and just say, you're out of here, dude. You know, it's like I need some space to actually find out who the hell I am. Is it okay to swear on your podcast, by the way, Malcolm?
I think it probably is.
You're right. I mean,
But
who am I talking to? But, you know,
fine.
I just want to make sure if I have to watch, watch
No,
my
don't
language.
filter too much.
I'll try and be, as appropriate as I possibly can. Yeah, so, and that really made a huge difference. And then, when my mother died, my situation, my mother was Jewish, my father was not Jewish. We were brought up in a very non-religious household. And of course, as soon as my mum died, I became extremely interested in my Jewish heritage. And of course, she wasn't around for me to ask her about that anymore. So I began to inquire a lot myself, and beginning also to recognize the importance of what you and I will call shadow in our lives and in our culture, etc. And beginning to recognize where that was showing up in my own life, it was an amazing kind of gift to literally accidentally bump into this incredible poet, Gertrude Kolmar, who I just opened up a brochure and there was a quote from her in there, and it blew my mind. And that led me to a whole new kind of exploration, which was a mission of inquiry. And rather than trying to make a statement, it was more about following a line of inquiry, following a kind of curiosity as to how to set these incredible words to music in some way. And so she became a real kind of teacher to me. So long answer, I'm afraid, Malcolm.
Sorry?
It's a long answer.
No, but it's a good one, because actually I think this concept of following.
Yeah.
And when I'm running therapy groups, I'm following the group. I don't have an agenda.
Yeah.
The agenda is to see what the agenda is.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing is you have a very similar line with your music. You are following where you're led in some ways. So this is a long way from commercial sort of like high flying, and yet it obviously feeds a part of you.
I appreciate, I agree with you completely, except I think that any songwriter at heart actually knows this, whatever the style. So, for example, I happened to be watching a rather lovely interview last night with Billie Eilish and her brother Phineas, with David Letterman, the way they were talking about songwriting then is, I can identify with all of it. It's and that's my experience with teaching. That I teach emerging songwriters a lot, and that I think is the theme. And it's a curious thing. There's this. I think this kind of reflects life a lot. There's a sense of intention that we have as writers and creators, but we have to be careful that we're not turning that intention into a kind of fixed point. It seems to me the intention is to explore. So you may be writing, for example, a breakup song. Well, you may be clear on the kind of things you want to say in the breakup song, but then it becomes a kind of mission of inquiry. So but I entirely agree with you. And I think I was far too unwilling in the old days I wanted to go with the first draft of things and not have a reflective. There's something great about going with the first draft of things, but as a kind of a splurge, and then the craft begins. And you can then begin your kind of critical. You can bring criticality to that and reflection to that and explore it. But I entirely agree that it's a mission of inquiry. And if we have a fixed agenda, I think it's kind of game over, because then that's just, for me, a very defensive way of writing songs.
It's funny, when I used to put on talks at St James's Piccadilly, we used to have sort of really well-known people come and speak there.
Yeah.
The ones who came with everything written down in front of them and they read it off their page.
Yeah.
I knew as soon as they started, they weren't going to inspire the audience.
Yeah.
I think we have to take risks in how we maneuver our way through our craft. And I like what you just described, that you have your splurge, and then you have to weave it.
Yeah, exactly. And to me, that is the art and craft of songwriting, and or any kind of artistic endeavor, actually. if I was ever going to write a book, which I'm not intending to do, but it would be called Splurge and Craft. And it would
Nice
be,
title.
it would be a look at those, the creative process from that point of view. And the reason I wouldn't want to write the book is I don't know I've got much more to say about it other than that. It's like Splurge and Craft. Yeah, got it. That's that kind of, that resonates with me. But in a way, the rest is the inquiry.
It's funny because there's a book called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. I'm
I
sure
know it well.
you know the title, but I've never read the book because I've never felt I needed to. I felt like he captured whatever he needed to say in
Yeah,
the title.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
Splurge and
exactly.
Craft, you've done that. So it's a 3-word book.
Yeah, exactly,
Yes,
exactly. Makes sense to me.
yes, yes.
Yeah,
So there's a sense of your, I think I've had a sense of you as you've gone along in your musical career that you've been driven by internal guides, and I don't mean that as sort of a wishy-washy sort of spiritual way. It's just
yeah,
that it's something about allowing what wants to be born inside us to come through.
yeah.
So the Kolmar piece, of course, that you wrote is obviously for me that was pretty mind-blowing to hear how you'd captured this extraordinary poet who'd obviously
Well,
suffered.
I enormously appreciate that, Malcolm. A couple of things about that. One of the things I've learned about the about kind of being an artist is that a lot of the time it's incredibly inconvenient. It's like every time that one of these Kolmar pieces has kind of come along to write, I know it's going to take me months. It's going to cost me thousands. It's probably not going to have any kind of relative commercial reality to it. So it's like, and so it's like, what is the justification for doing it? Why do it? And if I look at that from a rational point of view, sometimes from a budgetary point of view, it makes zero sense whatsoever. If I look at it in terms of kind of the nourishment that it has given me in my life, and again that idea of kind of it sounds a little bit pretentious, but I hope it doesn't come across too much like that. The sense of kind of giving oneself over to something is very amazing. And I mean, I was incredibly touched by your reference to some of the Kolmar pieces in reference to different trains, the Steve Reich piece, because that is one of my all-time great pieces to me, which somehow in its way of being it has quite a sense of how do I put it? The expressive intent is so powerful, but it's kind of framed in such a way which is almost quite dispassionate. But and for me, the way that he creates this kind of compassion through almost a kind of a what's the word? The piece is the piece is not what I would call an emotional piece in the kind of in the sense of it of kind of romantic period of music. If you look at Gustav Mahler, for example, who wrote pieces which are intensely emotional, and I love Mahler. I'm not dissing Mahler for 1 second. I adore Mahler, but there's something about the kind of at a distance sense that Steve Reich presents, something which to me no possible amount of emotiveness in music could actually create.
Exactly. And just for our audience who don't know the piece, just give us a brief synopsis of what it's about.
Okay. Well, Different Trains is a piece that Steve Reich wrote. Oh my goodness me, when did he write it? I apologize, but I can't remember the exact date, but I had to guess. I say late 60s.
Something around then, I think.
Something like that. And he realized that when his parents were divorced and they lived on different coasts of the States, and he would be taken by a nanny, if I'm remembering the story right, from one coast to another on the wonderful Pullman trains across the United States in the 1930s. And he loved those journeys, and they were exciting, they were exotic, they were fascinating, they were long, they were all, there's an adventure. But he realized in later life that as he was making those childhood journeys, the Jews were making very different kind of journeys of concentration camps. So he wrote a piece which contrasts those two journeys. And he does it with extraordinary kind of minimal means. It's written for kind of string quartet and backing tape. And the music is the music does shift quite profoundly from kind of one journey to the next, but the transformation, how do I explain it? He uses a lot of kind of conversational narrative from the time. So that might be recorded narrative from the train companies of the time, or it may be from recollection of Jews talking about their experience or their experience of relatives. So you get, excuse me, you get these little snippets of conversation which come in across alongside this kind of perpetual music, which changes its flavor and its tempo, but is continuous throughout the whole piece. But you suddenly realize that you've tipped from an optimistic, brilliant, childlike view of the world into utter horror. And the tip from one to the other, I remember when I first really listened to this, I was on a walk, and I think I just burst into tears. I mean, it was just overwhelmingly emotional. But it wasn't like I was being taking on an emotional journey, like I've got to feel the emotion now. It was impossible not to. It was so powerful. And
I remember when I first heard it, I had shivers down my spine. It's like, what's he done? How has he created this?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good question. So that's the
bringing
piece.
it back to you, Julian, because I feel like you capture some of that, certainly in the Kolmar piece, and also you've written subsequent pieces, which again capture some of that essence of really wanting to lay bare something that's happened in our human history.
Okay, well, I can say a little bit about that. I mean, one of the great things about working with the Gertrude Kolmar poems, and let me just say for a second, Gertrude Kolmar was a woman who died when she was 43 in 1946 in Auschwitz. She lived in Germany throughout the war, looking after her ill and aged dad until he died. Well, he was actually taken to a concentration camp when he died. But then some weeks later, she was taken to Auschwitz, where we don't know what happened to her, but she probably perished the very day she arrived. She maintained she is a poet of incredible quality, but is remarkably unknown. I mean, if we compare her with, let me just think. We do compare her with. I can't think of a complete an appropriate comparison at the moment. But with other poets of her time, well, I mean, Emily Dickinson springs to mind. I mean, she's known a fraction of the kind of following that Emily Dickinson has. But in my view, and I think the view of others for sure, she writes poetry of at least an equivalence in terms of quality. And somehow she does this thing of getting into the depth of human experience. And again, with a kind of mixture of compassion and dispassion, with a mix I find incredibly compelling, where you feel it's both bearing witness and of the experience at the same time. Now, that's something to achieve. Now, if I achieved any of that, which you're very kind of suggesting I have to some degree, it would be, in my view, through something like a kind of act of service to Gertrude Kolmar's poetry. So it's like I'm not attempting to set or say something with the poetry, so much as do my best to kind of, through my own filter system, kind of serve the poetry. And does the poetry need any music with it? Of course it doesn't. It doesn't need it at all. But there is an opportunity perhaps in framing the poetry through music, which offers an opportunity. And I learned so much from that, because there was a lot of, using a good Buddhist expression, of not knowing in the approach to writing the piece, and a lot of trust, and a lot of kind of, well, let's just see what happens here. And are the pieces perfect? Absolutely not. Are they flawed in terms of technique, in terms of structure? Absolutely yes. Do they communicate something on some level to some people? Yes, they seem to do so, and that's lovely. So that's that.
No, but I it's interesting, because I've watched your musical journey. I knew you when you were in your 20s, and we were both in our 20s.
Yeah.
And I've watched you as a musician sort of come of age. And the same way I could say I've watched myself come of age as a psychotherapist, that
Yes.
we develop because we have a passion for understanding the human experience and finding our way to express it. I'm putting this words into your mouth, and you probably have something slightly different to add to that.
Yeah, that's fine.
But I do see that actually it's almost like you are honoring the calling that's inside you.
Well, thank you. Sometimes it doesn't feel like that. It's like the quite often, in fact, you should talk to my wife Arabella about, the kind of ridiculous ego-orientated kind of doubt that I can bring to at any moment of the day. But what I would say about that is the only thing I would disagree with you with, not disagree, that I would put differently, would be understanding human experience, because I think I've given up on that one a long time ago. I'm not so much interested in understanding because I don't think it's understandable. What I am interested in is trying to be as human as possible. and it's one of the things I so appreciate about my relationship with you, Malcolm, is that there's no way that I need to filter any part of myself when I'm with you. However depraved the thoughts may be, etc. You just say, bring it on. It's just wonderful. And I so appreciate that. And I think, what's happening now, I've noticed, is I'm feeling very clear, really, that the Kolmar pieces, of which there were, how many were there? 1, 2, 3, kind of 5-ish. I think those pieces are gone. I think that's done, that project. What's showing up now is a kind of back to simplicity. And I'm really interested in music which kind of moves the body as much as as well as the mind. It's something more kind of holistic in that way. And also I've just been having the great pleasure of working with a young songwriter who has, again, something I find so much with young people and the young people that I teach is the kind of wisdom and understanding. It just blows me away, about being a human being. And for example, the idea that we are not one thing or another, we're all of it. And that with the artist I'm working with, who is an extraordinary songwriter and singer called Adelaide Percy, or Addie P is a professional name, that she's so interested in this inquiry. What is it to be a human being? And what is it to be with shadow? And what is it to kind of recognize these qualities that come through us, are in us, what need to be heard? And it's so I'm really excited about that.
So, and I think what I'm interested in is what takes us on that journey. What is it that sort of grabbed you and went, you need to do this? Or what is it that turned you into what you're becoming as an elder?
Well, I think the main thing was, actually, I think my parents dying was a major turning point. I think that it was something happened. What I notice about the kind of work that I've quote unquote done on myself is that, what can I say about that? That for me, what I used to think that how do I put this? I used to kind of think that I think a better way of putting it is that all I can say is that every bit of kind of work that I've done with myself of a therapeutic nature has just kind of oiled the wheels a bit. And does it mean that the behavior is necessarily going to change? Doesn't necessarily mean to say I have any more understanding of myself. Maybe a tiny bit, but it's like, it's for me, what's been so fascinating is in a way is to say and to recognize I don't know. And with that sense of I don't know comes in the sense of, great, well, if I don't know, why am I pretending to know? And why am I pretending to think that I understand something about myself and my people around me, when actually maybe it's just a fraction, and maybe that's fine, that it is just a fraction. But at the same time, that it feels very revelatory to kind of just say, I don't know. And therefore, it allows for all those voices to somehow be heard and to be given a place that I might have otherwise wanted to push away.
I mean, I think that's very interesting in a larger context as well, because again, when I go back to Alternatives, which is the series that I set up at Alternatives in 1983, and probably hosted more than 2,000 speakers, people like Eckhart Tolle and Marianne Williamson, very well-known names, Elizabeth Gilbert, Ram Dass. And what I realized is that the people who were able to allow themselves to be seen as not knowing, but inquiring, were the people who I felt I really wanted to listen to.
Yeah.
People who had fixed opinions about who they were and what they were doing.
Yeah.
It felt like it was ossified.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that's actually key. And again, we see it with politicians. Yeah. Very occasionally, you'll hear a politician saying something like, I don't know. And it's a revelation because they're not blagging it out.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, I suppose what you're touching on here is the thing that worries me mostly about the world.
Yes.
And it's exactly that. It's like, it seems to me that the world is so predicated on an assumption of, I know, I'm right. And that and what do we see happening everywhere? We just see one right against another right all over the place. And that's not a great way to live, as far as I can see.
No, it's not. And we see it again, of course, in religion. My God will help me win the battle. Well, why is your God better than my God or other gods?
Yeah, exactly.
So I think there is something that's humbling about becoming human, really becoming humane in our humanness.
Yeah.
Takes us to a place of questioning, a constant questioning of who we are and where it is we're heading and what we're doing.
Yeah, I entirely agree. I think, I'm really interested in this whole thing. People like I know you and I have talked a lot about this, but also people like Bernardo Kastrup and Rupert Spira who are very, very clear that, in kind of mainstream thinking, we've got the model wrong, which is the idea that, consciousness evolves out of matter. And they're saying, no, matter evolves out of consciousness. And for me, as soon as we shift that context from one thing to another, it's a game changer of unparalleled magnitude. It's kind of like, well, hang on a moment. You mean that consciousness is essentially just one kind of consciousness thing? Not a thing, but of which we kind of manifest out of in some way, as much as I am, and this calculator and this pencil and my glasses and others. And for me, I don't even care if it's true or not, but the model of actually interconnectivity for me is really inspiring.
Yeah, and for me also, I think there is a sort of sense that we are so much more than we know we are.
Yeah,
and that actually it's like it's an incredible journey to be human, to be in a human body. I remember lying in bed a few weeks ago and lying there and suddenly realizing that this body, this personality, was a vehicle in which consciousness was living. And I thought this could be going a bit into sort of spaced out thinking, but it didn't feel that way. It felt like something there was a stillness in that thought. And I had a very interesting thought when I had a heart attack in 2021, as you know.
Yeah.
And I was in an ambulance on the way to hospital thinking I was dying. And in that moment, there was a moment of incredible peace.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to to keep trying to do anything. I just let go. And I thought, if I die, I've written my legacy book. I've lived, I think, a pretty decent life with obviously some mistakes and have hurt people. And those hurt me now.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, we are in a place of, I don't know, and in a place where one of the things I want to explore in this series is, what does the next stage of evolution potentially look like? What are we going to become if we're really going to survive as human beings? How can we break the mold of the sort of patriarchal, sort of violent society that we've grown up knowing in our background.
Yes, yes. Well put, Malcolm. I can only agree.
Yes, yes,
Yeah, well, when I was growing up in the 1960s, I did not imagine that life was going to look like it does now. You know, there's a wonderful, one of my favorite albums of all time is called The Night Fly by Donald Fagen. And for me, it's such a terrific example of a kind of ethno-autographic album. He's talking about growing up in the 50s and 60s with this kind of extraordinary sense of optimism. What a glorious world this will be. What a wonderful time, what a glorious time to be free. What's the rest of the chorus? Oh, I just got blank on it. How annoying. Anyway, the whole album kind of reflects the kind of idea of kind of optimism and kind of bright-eyed hope and exhilaration. And I know that I was a young person at the time. I was born in 54, so 60s, you know, I was still a very young person. But throughout the 60s and 70s, I suppose probably until Thatcher, I did begin to feel that, you know, life was kind of pretty good. And it's kind of going in the right direction, isn't it? In fact, I felt life was incredible. I didn't feel life was pretty good. I felt life was amazing. But the world seemed to be kind of tipping in the right direction. And I remember discovering things like, I mentioned the S training, you know, S training totally transformed my life. And it was like, oh God, all these other people feel this kind of, you know, feel the same way, that there's this incredible gift called life, you know, and it's from that kind of brightness to the kind of challenges that we're facing right now, feels like it's a reality check like no other. And
yes.
I neither feel optimistic nor doom laden about the future, but it's certainly not a done deal.
Well, that's interesting. I was talking to another of my guests the other day about Joanna Macy, and that she came and spoke at Alternatives. It was probably the speaker who's impressed me the most.
Yeah.
And what she said is, this is the time of the great turning. This is a time where we're either going to evolve and become what we were meant to become as human beings, or we're going to perish. And we don't know which it's going to be, but we have to feed the part that wants to live, the part that wants to be alive and to grow and to develop.
Yeah.
I can see that the work that you're doing is your contribution to that part. It's a drop, and it's, you know, all of us are droplets in the ocean.
Yeah.
But those droplets gradually expand as well.
That's a lovely way of putting it, Malcolm. I agree. I love the idea of, and it's been really great, you know, to be a musician with the willingness to be the tiniest droplet. But that doesn't mean that at all that you give any less. You know, the idea that bigger is better in the world of the arts is so prevalent. You know, we're living right now absolutely in a world with, you know, dominated by Spotify and TikTok, etc., where bigger is better, 100%. And in fact, you know, quantity over quality, 100%. Thank God for incredible songwriters like Billie Eilish and Phineas, who are showing us that I mean, they use machines, but the machines do not use them. And, you know, that for me is absolutely crucial. And I think one of the things for me, as I was saying before, I mean, working with Adelaide, for example, is a gift that I did not see coming at the stage of my life. And it's a gift for me of kind of, I can't tell you how what a privilege it is to be working with her as a young songwriter, and the joy and the fun of creating and collaborating and creating in that way. And I've had the privilege of working with other young creatives over the last few projects. You know, it is such a gift. So I'm coming up to my 70th birthday 2 weeks tomorrow.
Oh, you're an elder, Julian. Great.
And you know, I did not expect this to feel like a kind of, in a way, a new start. And yeah, I mean, it's you know, I just, as long as these wonderful young creatives who are happy to work with me, you know, I want to go on working with them forever.
Well, you know, I can't think of anyone better who would be able to help them in their process. And I remember
They help me with mine. I mean, I
yeah,
don't feel like I am, Marks. You know, it's like I feel that they're helping with me with mine. Absolutely, it does. It's one of the great things about, you know, as you know yourself, that you know, it's very age leveling creative process. You know, it's like, yeah, one bit of experience over here is interesting, but that other experience over there is equally interesting. You know, so that's like,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's funny because I first I had a sort of a revelatory moment in 2009 about music when I went to see Leonard Cohen
yeah,
live in concert. It was, and in fact, the album that concert was made into the album Live in
yeah,
London.
yeah,
And I realized that here was a sage in the
yeah,
role of a musician,
yeah,
being able to bring through wisdom
yeah,
and also to create an environment. 15,000 people were in that hall,
yeah,
create an environment where those 15,000 people felt like they were part of one community for that evening.
yeah.
And
Malcolm,
I see that music is such a powerful medium and
yeah.
has such potential to
Yeah.
lift our spirits.
Well, it's great you should mention Leonard Cohen because Dance Me to the End of Love is very much on the same kind of level as Different Trains is. Now, the musical language is incredibly different. The topic is identical. You know, Cohen is quoted himself as saying that this is about perishing in the gas chambers. And when I first heard it, all I knew is that my world was completely rocked by this piece. I had no idea what it's about. Now, admittedly, I did hear it in a wake because when I very first heard it,
Mm.
and it was so you know I was skewed to be very moved in the first place. But every time I heard it after that, I was like, what is it about this piece that just kind of pulls the rug away from under my feet? And I agree with you entirely about Leonard Cohen.
Well, it's funny because people use that for marriages. That's they think it's a love song,
Yeah,
a love song,
it is.
a very different level. And you've got words like "Dance me to your beauty with your burning violin, dance me through the panic till I'm
Yeah,
gathered safely in."
yeah,
You know, that is a man who understands the process, just bringing
exactly.
it through in beautiful music.
Exactly, Malcolm. You've hit the nail right on the head. Yeah, I mean, it would be good if people at their weddings knew what they were dancing to, because I'm all for it. But it'd be great if they knew what they were dancing
Yeah,
to.
it's true.
People
So,
also dance to, you know, Sting. Um, I'll be watching you. You know, every breath you take,
yes, yes.
which always kind of amuses me, because do people know that this is a stalking song? You know, that actually it's another very wonderful songwriter.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
That's the magic of music, and I
yeah,
think you are one of those magicians. I know I don't want to feed your ego too much either, but it's like
you can
your
try.
music. Your music is your life, and I
Yeah,
really see that in many different ways. That's the common theme that's gone through your life.
yeah. Well, it's taken me 70 years to actually own that.
Great,
So thank you for feeding that back. I appreciate that a lot, Marks.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's been lovely talking to you. We're coming to the end of
You
our
too. You
so
too.
really
Great.
glad we managed to connect in this way.
Yeah, me too, Malcolm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And you know, I've noticed before that, you know, that we will get on Zoom and have great chats together. There's something about the kind of formality of something like this where I feel that we sometimes get to places in a way that we might not necessarily get to in a half-hour conversation, just the
Yes.
two of us. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, because I realized we sort of started this with very much the personal, but then it went into sort of something
Yeah,
very, which took its own shape.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it just, you know, it opens my mind and helps me to
yeah.
sort of like to go, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, for me too. For me
Yeah.
too. Thank you.
Yeah.
Much appreciated.
Thank you, Julian. We will be in touch
Great.
and
You're very welcome. And yes, see you all soon.
cheers.
Bye.
Bye then.